Hello there, welcome to Planet America's Weekend Edition. I'm John Barron.
And I'm Licciardello.
This week, fears that a crackdown on dissent is leading to a new era of McCarthyism.
And an iconic polling site is shutting down, just as Trump's approval ratings slump. But first...
And first this week to the story of Mahmoud Khalil. He's a 30-year-old graduate of New York's Columbia University. Born in Syria into an exiled Palestinian family, Khalil came to the United States to study in 2022. Last year, as the war in Gaza raged on, he emerged as a spokesperson for the pro-Palestinian demonstrators on the Columbia campus. And that involvement brought him a national profile.
This is a movement, an anti-war movement.
Khalil's involvement in those protests in which some students occupied campus buildings and allegedly intimidated some Jewish students also saw Khalil suspended from Columbia.
I was not part of this encampment. I did not sleep in the encampment. This shows the randomness and the arbitrary measures that the university is taking against their students.
In fact, Khalil said that he stayed away from the encampments because he was concerned that his student visa would be revoked. His enrolment was quickly reinstated, though. He has since graduated with a master's degree from the School of International and Public Affairs. Khalil also married an American woman. Their first child is due within a couple of weeks. And Khalil has been granted permanent residency and a green card to be able to live and work in the United States. But an online intimidation campaign has started to gain momentum. Some Jewish students said that he spent over a year abusing the privileges this country and Columbia gave him. And then, a week ago, agents from ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, came knocking.
Now, the 30-year-old was detained, we know, by ICE agents on Saturday at his Columbia University-owned residence on campus. ICE agents said that his student visa was revoked under Trump's executive order, but when he showed them that he's actually not here on a student visa, rather he is a legal permanent resident with a green card, they said that was also revoked.
And ominously, President Trump warned this week, this is just the beginning.
I think we ought to get them all out of the country. They're troublemakers, they're agitators. They don't love our country. We ought to get him the hell out. I think that guy, we ought to get him. I heard his statements too. They were plenty bad. And I think we ought to get him the hell out of the country. I watched him. I watched tapes. Specifically, I watched tapes. And you can have him, okay? You can have him. And you can have the rest of them.
The White House hasn't shared those alleged tapes. And funny to see the free speech absolutist Elon Musk just nodding along there, apparently exercising his right to remain silent. Khalil, meanwhile, has not been charged with any crime. No evidence to support the claim that he's involved with terrorist groups or supports them has been produced. Friends of Khalil maintain that he is pro-Palestinian, sure, but not pro-Hamas. And he was simply exercising his right to both free speech and the right to protest.
It's very clear that these people who are screaming about anti-Semitism and accusations of terror against a very broad and diverse protest movement are not interested in keeping any Jew safe or anyone safe. They're interested in crushing dissent, and in this case, they're interested in punishing higher education.
We're going to be hearing a lot about the First Amendment to the US Constitution in the next few minutes. So here's what it says. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. More importantly, it also says they will not abridge the freedom of speech or of the press or of the right of people to peaceably assemble. And as well, they have the right to petition the government for a redress of any grievances of those matters. Now, Mahmoud Khalil remains in ICE detention as of today. This week, a judge did step in to delay his deportation back to Syria. Protests, though, have erupted across college campuses, including Columbia. A group of Jewish students even stormed Trump Tower in New York, demanding Khalil be released. Close to 100 of them were arrested. Meanwhile, Democrats, including the likes of Senator Chris Murphy, are saying this is an issue that should be of great concern to all Americans.
Because once it becomes norm for the regime to disappear people simply for protest against the regime's policies, once a citizen or a resident of America can be locked away with no charges against them simply because they protested, there is no going back for America. Even if you're a hardened Trump supporter, this practice should cross the line for you.
It's interesting, John, you referred to the argument that Khalil hasn't been charged with any crime. That's been made a few times. Notorious immigration restrictionist Ann Coulter made the same argument, saying that there's almost no one I don't want to deport, but unless they've committed a crime, isn't this a violation of the First Amendment? Now, Marco Rubio says we're looking at this all wrong. He says it's not about committing crimes. Khalil isn't going to jail, he's being deported. Rubio says this is about whether the government has the right to revoke a visa.
You come to the United States as a visitor, which is what a visa is, which is how this individual entered this country, as on a visitor's visa. Okay, you are here as a visitor. We can deny you that visa. We can deny you that if you tell us when you apply, hi, I'm trying to get into the United States on a student visa. I am a big supporter of Hamas, a murderous, barbaric group that kidnaps children, that rapes teenage girls, that takes hostages, that allows them to die in captivity, that returns more bodies than live hostages. If you tell us that you are in favor of a group like this, and if you tell us when you apply for your visa, and by the way, I intend to come to your country as a student and rile up all kinds of anti-Jewish student, anti-Semitic activities, I intend to shut down your universities. If you told us all these things when you applied for a visa, we would deny your visa. I hope we would. If you actually end up doing that, once you're in this country on such a visa, we will revoke it.
Now let's leave aside whether that's an accurate description of Khalil that Rubio just gave you there, because I don't think it is. But do they have the right to revoke a green card full stop? Well, there is a statute that suggests that yes, they clearly do. Section 1227 states that if the Secretary of State has reasonable ground to believe the migrant's presence has potentially serious adverse foreign policy consequences for America, then yes, they can deport them. Rubio presumably has made that judgment. Another statute specifically bars any alien who endorses terrorist activity or persuades others to endorse terrorist activity or to support a terrorist organisation. Now, Hamas has been officially designated a terrorist organisation by the US government, so that there would be grounds for deportation as well. Now, there is an exception in the statute, though, for free speech concerns. It prohibits deportation if the migrants' beliefs, statements or associations would normally be lawful in America, which in this case, they absolutely would because of the First Amendment. But that exception doesn't apply if the Secretary of State personally determines that the alien's presence would compromise a compelling US foreign policy interest, which once again, I imagine Rubio would do. So, the statutory law is not necessarily on Khalil's side at all here, but is the Constitution. Because does that law there that I just read out violate the First Amendment? There is a precedent on the books from 1952. It says legal aliens could be deported for membership in the Communist Party. That would not violate the First Amendment. So there is kind of an analogy there to supporting Hamas. So it would suggest that Khalil's deportation would not be unconstitutional if they can prove he supports Hamas. But there are all kinds of arguments that could be made to the Supreme Court that this is unconstitutional. Like, for instance, no green card holder could possibly know what conduct might or might not bother Marco Rubio at any particular moment. So that statute is way too vague and therefore should not be constitutional. And look, that's just one argument. There's many other arguments that could be made and are being made right now. This is fresh legal ground. There's nothing like this on the books. So we have no idea where this is going. Although, you know who does think this move is illegal? Trump's first administration does. Trump's Justice Department wrote that lawful permanent residents, which is Khalil, very likely could not be excluded or removed for expressing mere philosophical support for terrorism. That's interesting, isn't it? The White House is being very open as well about the fact that if they do win this case, they're going to push this precedent to the limit. They've already provided Columbia with a list of students who they demand to be handed over for deportation.
Columbia University has been given the names of other individuals who have engaged in pro-Hamas activity, and they are refusing to help DHS identify those individuals on campus. And as the president said very strongly in his statement yesterday, he is not going to tolerate that, and we expect all America's colleges and universities to comply with this administration's policy.
Whoa, so the stakes are very high on this one, John.
Yeah, and Mahmoud Khalil clearly knew that the stakes were high for him last year because he was concerned about losing his student visa. He was not, as Marco Rubio alleged, riling up the crowds. He was not getting involved with some of the illegal trespasses that were happening on campus grounds. He was very deliberate in doing that. He's since got a green card, married to an American citizen. But this still means that there are now, in the United States, talk about the stakes being high, between 1 to 2 million student visa holders. Basically, if they take part in any protest that relates to international affairs or criticising America even, they could face deportation. Then there's another 12, maybe 13 million green card holders, based on the Khalil precedent, that could have ICE come knocking on their door and say, well, you said nothing in your application about being a rabble-rouser and stirring up internal dissent. And this is where people are saying, well, this is like McCarthyism in the early 1950s, where you don't even have to provide evidence to say that this person has terrorist sympathies or that they have incited any violence or hold these views at all. You can simply make the allegation that is enough to lock them up. Sure, they're not being sent to jail for life, unless they're sent to Gitmo perhaps, and that is enough to deprive them of their liberty. They even tried to arrest Khalil's wife before she proved she in fact is an American citizen, not just a green card holder or a visa holder. So this is why this goes beyond the question of just free speech amongst international students on campuses, but free speech, as Chris Murphy suggested, for all Americans who disagree with Donald Trump.
I think you make an excellent point about the evidence, by the way, because I just went through all the legals, assuming they can prove their case.
Right.
But I haven't seen any evidence that Khalil himself is a massive Hamas supporter. He's a member of a group that definitely supports Hamas.
Yep.
There's no doubt about that group. But I haven't seen any video of Khalil himself saying anything. So I'm presuming they have that evidence, but I'd like to see that evidence.
Yeah, and it's also very, very problematic to talk about people supporting Hamas, because just as you can support the Israeli government or the Israeli Defence Force, you don't necessarily endorse everything that they do. Similarly, Hamas has committed atrocities, there is no doubt. Hamas has also provided hospitals and healthcare and education and a social safety net in a part of the world which otherwise would not have had it. When some people support some of Hamas, I think we can afford to allow that there is a distinction there, while also saying Hamas does some very bad things.
Yeah, I was going to say the group itself supports the bad things. Right. I'll tell you that. I've seen footage of it. But once again, let's see if Khalil does.
Yeah.
The other point you made, which I think is well worth picking up on, is what does terrorism mean? Because, Hamas now is an official terrorist organisation. But, I've seen Elon Musk describe people who support Ukraine as terrorists.
Yeah.
Like he said Senator Mark Kelly was a traitor for supporting Ukraine.
I've seen Elon Musk give a few rather anti-Semitic looking gestures in recent times.
Well, there's that. I saw Trump this week say that people who vandalise Teslas are
terrorists.
Are terrorists.
Yeah.
So that can be a real slippery slope. One other thing, with the law, I was rattling through a bunch of legislation really quickly. There's one key word that keeps coming up. It's the word reasonable. That is going to be the court case. The court case is Marco Rubio's judgment reasonable or not? I have no idea what the Supreme Court's going to say about this. And I just one more point before we move on to the interview, and that is, we heard a few people talking about disappearing. A key aspect of this, which we just brushed past, is that he is currently in Louisiana. He was arrested in New York, moved to New Jersey, and then to Louisiana. That's important because in Louisiana, he's in the Fifth Circuit, which is a very conservative part of the country. That could mean by the time he gets to the Supreme Court, there's a very different record from the appeals court than there would be if he's moved back to New York. So that right now they're debating where he's going to be held trial. That's a critical question to this particular case.
Yeah, it's a fascinating one, as it will be if there is evidence of overt anti-Semitism from Khalil, because that could see a lot of the philosophical support that he's receiving at the moment, certainly in progressive circles in the United States, disappear quite quickly. So does the Trump administration have a card up their sleeve here to just lure Democrats and progressives into supporting this man and then say, here's your evidence, he's a bad dude?
I'm sorry, I should mention one other thing. Colombia has also been fined, where they've lost $400 million in grants for not doing enough to fight anti-Semitism, according to the Trump administration. That's another whole legal can of worms, which we're not even getting into.
Yeah.
This is very complicated.
Yeah, it sure is. But joining us now is Catherine Ross. She's Professor of Law at George Washington University. She specialises in constitutional law with a particular focus on that First Amendment to the Constitution. Professor, welcome to Planet America. This has been likened by some to that early 1950s era of McCarthyism, that it is now enough to allege that somebody is anti-Semitic or indeed un-American, and therefore you can be arrested and maybe deported. Do you share that level of concern right now?
I don't know if it is the single biggest constitutional crisis that we are facing at this very moment, because there are so many going on and being anticipated. It is certainly appalling, shocking to the conscience, and almost inconceivable that someone living in America with a green card and married to an American citizen, expecting their child, who will be an American citizen, could be essentially disappeared, as we used to use it when we were talking about South American dictatorships. But he was snatched from his home, told that he had no rights, not allowed to call a lawyer, told that his green card was being revoked, which is not possible for the arresting immigration officers to do, and spirited off first to New Jersey, out of state, and then to an undisclosed location where ICE keeps people. And finally, his location was disclosed. He was taken to a jurisdiction that is much more likely to be deferential to the government. He was living in New York. He was taken from New York. So presumably, New York is the place that should hear, for example, a habeas corpus petition. But the government is trying very hard to get him moved to Louisiana, which is not only a deeply conservative state with a conservative trial court system, but is overseen by a very conservative appellate court. And as of last night, and I don't know what happened today, I haven't been able to find out, but as of last night, he had not been able to meet with his attorney, which is, attorneys should have immediate access in the United States.
Professor, the fact that he has a green card and it doesn't just have a student visa, how much difference does that make to the actual legal issues here? Has the government found themselves an unnecessarily difficult target as their test case?
Fabulous question. If he were here on a student visa and he violated the university's rules and they decided to expel him, he clearly did violate university rules, but he was not penalized and he's graduated. But if the hypothetical were he's still a student, they expel him, he no longer has a student visa, he can be immediately deported. And in fact, that is one of the alleged reasons why many universities last academic year declined to impose heavy penalties on particularly pro-Hamas demonstrators, because they didn't want them to lose their residency in the US. Some of them would have been going back to repressive regimes, etc. So the government here has admitted that Khalil didn't commit any crimes for which he could be prosecuted. He did occupy university buildings and refused to leave, and was not just a negotiator, but apparently was a leader of the occupation demonstrations as recently as last week, when they occupied the library at Barron College, an affiliate of Columbia. So it's a very different legal situation. students are at much greater risk.
Professor, as you said, that he's currently in Louisiana. His lawyers are trying to get him moved back to New York. How much difference does that make to the eventual case, given presumably all roads lead to the Supreme Court? So does it not matter where he starts, or does it actually matter where he starts?
You are right that ultimately this case is likely to reach the Supreme Court. They, of course, don't have to take any particular case. They take very few cases every year. But we'll assume this is a significant case that's going to make law, and they're likely to hear it. The record that's developed by the lower courts might be very different if the case is heard in Louisiana as opposed to the Southern District of New York. And that could make a big difference.
There is, of course, Professor, another option. Dozens of detainees in Louisiana have found themselves sent to Guantanamo Bay in Cuba. We also understand that a number of them have then been repatriated back to Louisiana for reasons that are not quite clear.
The government is changing its mind about tariffs, Guantanamo. They're just like, you have to check what time of day it is to know what the policy is.
Could we see a situation where Khalil ends up in that legal limbo where people have spent 20 years plus without charge in detention at a US Navy base in Cuba?
I wish I could say no, but so many unimaginable things are happening today in the United States with our government and our justice system. Yes, that is possible, and Guantanamo is US territory.
Professor, the Trump administration has openly said that this is not a one-off. They have every intention of ignoring lots of people's free speech rights and deporting a whole heap of them. Does that kind of announcement make a difference to the courts?
In theory, judges should not pay attention to things that are going on outside the courtroom. But judges are human beings, and they read the news. They will also understand that this is not a one-off. We're being told if the government wins here, it will conclude that the way it acted in this case is the way it can act in any case. And we also know that as part of the immigration sweeps, they are picking up US citizens. There was a case reported recently where a child who was a US citizen was forced to leave with, I believe it was a girl, with her parents, even though there were relatives willing to keep her in the United States, and the parents said they wanted her to stay in the United States. So we're deporting citizens. We're deporting people who have not committed any crimes. And this is not legal. But by the time the court system plays out in these cases, people's lives will have been transformed. Justice is very slow, and particularly with appeals.
Well, Professor Ross, we really appreciate your expertise. Thank you for taking the time to talk to us.
Thank you for talking to me.
In the first few weeks of Donald Trump's second term, many American voters seemed to welcome him back. He consistently passed 50% approval in polls, something he never managed in his first four-year term. And Trump's flurry of executive actions and sweeping changes seemed to create a sense of momentum and change that voters liked. But 7 weeks in, and there are some worrying signs for Trump that some voters, at least, are already growing weary with his flood the zone tactics, which may dominate the news cycle, but are spooking the markets and business confidence with all these threatened tariffs and changes. Trump himself this week entertained the idea that America could indeed be sliding into a recession.
I hate to predict things like that. There is a period of transition because what we're doing is very big. We're bringing wealth back to America.
This week, a poll from CNN found there was a spike in the number of Americans who expect economic conditions will be poor next year. 51%, that's up 7 points since just before Trump took office in January. 51% also think that Trump's policies have worsened economic conditions. They're blaming him. Just 28% say that Trump has improved things. Trump's overall approval rating has slipped as well to 45%. Perhaps more importantly, though, is his approval for the handling of the economy specifically. It's down to 44%. And Chaz, that's a real departure from Trump's first term, where his handling of the economy typically ran higher than his overall approval. It was propping him up. So in short, Trump's strong suit, at least from his first term, is possibly starting to fail him.
Yeah, that's literally the first time since he was elected president in 2017 that Trump has been below 50% in economic approval, according to CNN. Never happened before. And it's no wonder. The economic polling right now, appalling. Last month, Gallup found only 20% of people felt the economy was good or excellent right now. That's even worse than during COVID. Reuters recently found that people think in the economy that was on the wrong track, it rose 10% in a fortnight, from 43% to 53%. And why was that? Simple. 32% of people in that poll approved of Trump's performance on inflation. He spent the whole election riding on anger about high prices. Now the shoe's on the other foot. Check out the University of Michigan's inflationary expectations polling. This is as of last month. This is telling you what people expect inflation to be in 12 months. That's risen 1.7% since the election. Importantly, inflationary expectations can also create actual inflation because it affects the way people spend money. They might buy more now to beat price rises, and it causes an increase in demand and therefore an increase in inflation. Also, no mystery is where these inflationary expectations are coming from. It's the threat of tariffs, of course. Trump's people have been trying to argue that tariffs actually reduce prices for Americans.
He's going there today as he's proposing tax hikes in the form of tariffs. And I'm curious for why he's prioritizing that over the tax cuts.
He's actually not implementing tax hikes. Tariffs are a tax hike on foreign countries that, again, have been ripping us off. Tariffs are a tax cut for the American people.
But this whole tariffs don't cause inflation argument isn't even working on Fox News.
Don't get inflation from having a tariff, because what a tariff says is if it's made in Europe, if it's made foreign, it might cost a little more, but that which is made in America does not cost more. This concept of how about we buy American steel, we buy American aluminum. There's U.S. Steel, you know it, there's Nucor, right? There's Cleveland Cliffs. We make plenty of steel in America.
Domestic producers
plenty of steel in America. Let's strengthen that.
Domestic producers can't keep up with demand. The supply is limited, demand is strong. The price is going up.
And Stuart Varney there is right. America can't just take over all foreign production instantly like that. In the case of steel, steel prices have already gone up 20% under Trump, even before the latest steel tariff increases this week. That's compared to only a 6% price rise in Europe. It's very hard to deny price increases that are already occurring. So that's why, according to market polling, only 32% of people are saying tariffs help the US economy, compared to 51% of people saying tariffs hurt the economy. Even amongst Republicans, only 61% say that tariffs are helping the economy. By the way, the problems don't end there either for Trump. Only 37% of people approve of how he's handling foreign policy, and 50% disapprove of that. Now, in that CNN poll you described before, John, there are all kinds of worrying numbers. Only 35% of people expressed a positive view of Elon Musk, for instance. 33% have a favourable view of J.D. Vance. The only bright light I could see is, ironically, immigration. That's the one area where know-it-all pundits like us expected to be a problem for Trump somewhere down the line. 51% of people now say they approve of Trump's work on immigration, 7 points higher than at any point during his first term. Now, if I was Trump, I'd just hold on to my controlled border and I wouldn't push it at all, although there are all kinds of rumours out there that he wants to ramp up the deportations further. So we'll see how that works out for him, John.
Yeah, ironically though, if you create a recession through tariffs and you worsen that recession by expelling 10 million foreign nationals who are working in the United States, you also create a kind of a social climate where people become more anti-immigrant because they have less money and fewer jobs themselves. So it becomes a little bit self-fulfilling. But you talked about J.D. Vance there and his lack of popularity. He's not really helping right now. This is what J.D. said on Fox News a little earlier today. The fundamentals of the economy are actually quite strong right now. Rather unfortunate echoes for those old enough to remember back to 2008 at the start of the global financial crisis, then Senator John McCain, as America hurtled towards the greatest downturn since the Great Depression. He famously said that the fundamentals of our economy are strong. Yeah, but at least for Trump, he's going to avoid the possible economic damage of a government shutdown this weekend, because even though a number of Senate Democrats were not going to get on board and support it, their leader, Chuck Schumer, has now turned around and said, you know what, I am going to support a continuing resolution to keep the lights on for another 6 months, even though Schumer himself says that this was a very, very bad continuing resolution. He was concerned, and possibly with good cause, that if they shut the government down, Trump and Elon Musk may not reopen a lot of it. They just keep it shut down. It could be giving them what they want. So they saw a political downside as well as an economic downside as well.
Yeah, this was a win-win situation for Trump, and to his credit, he won in the win-win situation. It's a win for him.
Yeah,
so
it's still extraordinary to me, though, that we're seeing Caroline Leavitt and Trump himself continuing to parrot this demonstrable falsehood that tariffs are attacks on foreign countries.
It's not working.
And even the argument that Lutnick and Navarro and others try and use to say, oh, well, but it sends a price signal. If you increase the price of Chinese T-shirts in American stores, Americans will buy more American T-shirts. So you'll increase production of American T-shirts, which is fine if you've got T-shirt factories that are already making T-shirts and can make more T-shirts. But of course, if you've got to start looking for aluminium resources or iron ore or start manufacturing cars from scratch, it just doesn't work.
You know what? The guy loves tariffs. He's always loved tariffs. He ran on tariffs.
Right.
He could not be more open about tariffs. Let him go down swinging on tariffs. If like that's how it's meant to work. That's how democracy's meant to work. He should go for it. He should let his tariff flag fly. Let's see what happens. Yeah. Win by the sword, die by the sword. Let's see.
OK, we'll see how that works out, as you suggest. Speaking of polls, though, sad news this week for US politics junkies with the announcement that the FiveThirtyEight website is being shut down. The polling and analysis site, founded by Nate Silver back in 2008, has gone through a number of major changes and owners over the years, moving first to the New York Times in 2010, then to ABC News in 2018. It was ABC America's parent company, Disney, that decided this week to pull the plug on what was just a 15-person operation as a part of wider cuts and cost savings across the organisation. Nate Silver left FiveThirtyEight in 2023. This week he tweeted the remaining employees, quote, deserved much better. Well, for more on that, we're joined by Nathaniel Rakich, the now former senior editor and election analyst at FiveThirtyEight. Nathaniel, welcome to Planet America. Thanks for joining us this week. I know a lot of our viewers are also readers and listeners to your podcasts, and they're going to be disappointed to hear that FiveThirtyEight has now closed.
Oh, well, thank you. Yes, it's very sad that FiveThirtyEight is gone, but we think we had a really great run, and we're really proud of the work that we did. So, I think it is a time to, celebrate the good work that we did and not necessarily to mourn.
It seems to me that for years, FiveThirtyEight has provided a way to cut through partisanship and punditry, but does its demise now mean that people just don't want facts and data points that they don't agree with?
Well, maybe it's optimistic of me, but I think there is still a pretty big audience for that stuff. I think that a lot of the work that FiveThirtyEight has done has gone mainstream. FiveThirtyEight started back in 2008 as a blog, started by Nate Silver, and it really kind of took a couple of election cycles in 2008 and 2012 when Nate's analysis proved to be right on the money for people to really start paying attention and see the value in kind of a quantitative and data-driven approach to analyzing elections. But as a result, imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. Other places, legacy media companies have really taken up the mantle. And so even though it's obviously sad that FiveThirtyEight is gone and won't be doing this, there are a lot of good people out at other media outlets who are now really data literate and doing a really good job analyzing elections.
Nathaniel, given that, as you say, FiveThirtyEight's methods are now part of the wider media, Would you say maybe that there's no longer a need for 538?
Well, no, obviously, I think that 538 had a role to play in analyzing elections. I think that we did work that other places have either don't do or haven't done as well. I think that our visual interactives were really beautiful. Shout out to our visual journalists for that. Some of the work we did in kind of quantifying probabilities, collecting data like all the polling data, but also more bespoke data sets. Like in the 2022 election, we collected all of the Republican candidates for Congress and their stances on the validity of the 2020 election. And that was something that no other media outlet did. So I think we were still doing really good work, and I think it is definitely a loss to not have that. But again, hopefully other places will take up the mantle and continue it.
I wonder, Nathaniel, can you give us any sort of an insight into what was happening at that sort of corporate level to reach this decision? I don't imagine that for an operation the size of Disney, laying off 15 staff isn't going to make a big difference.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't been in those meetings, so I don't really know what the thought process was. Obviously, it's a tough time for the media industry overall, and I think that's a shame. I think we need more journalists, not fewer, in this time, and again, more journalists who are doing kind of quantitative work that is evidence driven and not kind of opinion based and things like that. And it was a shame.
On polling more broadly, Nathaniel, since 2016 and Trump's surprise victory, there's been a lot of scepticism about polls from both the left and the right. What do you make of all those narratives, either from the right that pollsters are all liberals and they're all biased, and the left suspects that these polls are deliberately missing out on Trump voters just so that they spring a surprise? What do you make of all that?
Yeah, I think that polls have generally been as accurate as they've ever been, which is to say they're not magical. They've never been magical bullets, like in the 2008 and 2012 elections when Nate's predictions were really right on the money. Those were unusually good years, and the 2016 and 2020 elections in particular were a little bit worse for the polls, but that's normal. They are imperfect measures of public opinion, and they come with margins of error. And I think part of the job at 538 that we did was try to explain that, right? It's not just that we are reporting on polls and saying this is the truth. It's trying to put them into context for people and helping them understand the limitations and how polling works, and why when you take a sample of 1,000 Americans, that isn't necessarily going to stand in for the population of 300 million people. It's going to come pretty close, remarkably close, actually, I think, considering how far 1,000 is away from 300 million. But it is going to come with that margin of error, and helping people understand that is a big part of what we did. And so I think that it's still worth doing, and I hope that, again, other places continue to do it.
Nathaniel, are you worried about dodgy pollsters exploiting people's ignorance now that 538's analysis and polling averages aren't there to keep them in line?
Yeah, I think that the proliferation of kind of lower quality pollsters has been an issue for the last couple of years. And I do think that 538 played an important role. We did a kind of investigations. Anytime there was a new pollster on the scene, we would vet them. And, usually they would be okay. Occasionally they'd be very high quality. Usually they would be something that is, they'd be perfectly a valid operation, but maybe, not the highest quality, like a New York Times poll, for instance. But occasionally they would maybe be duplicitous, or the numbers would be made up. And, without 538 or a similar outlet doing that vetting work, I would be concerned about that. Again, I hope somebody else kind of takes up that call, but I think that's another important role that 538 was filling that, maybe somebody else, isn't doing right now.
And do you have any advice for reporters covering this kind of beat, how not to fall into the trap of peddling misconceptions that are debunked by the data and the polls?
Yeah, I guess I would say, use data in your coverage, consider it like any other source. I think that the advantage that polls have and that other kind of empirically driven sources have is that they are rigorous and kind of scientifically proven, and in a way that if you just go out and interview two people on the street, that isn't going to give you the same kind of overall slice of the population that a poll would give you, for example. But at the same time, you should treat a poll like any other source in that it may not be totally reliable. You should be skeptical of it. You should interrogate it and kind of include appropriate caveats and interrogate it when maybe it says something unexpected, and not just kind of take it as the granted, like take it as the automatic truth. But I definitely encourage people to use data responsibly in their stories whenever possible.
Would you say that now 538's gone, there would be particular stories or issues that will be less well served?
And I think that, election coverage, again, there are a lot of other great data journalists doing good election analysis, but I think that 538 did provide a great service in terms of aggregating all the polls, and we basically previewed and recapped most elections, even some more obscure ones. Like, we were looking forward to covering the election for state Supreme Court in Wisconsin in April, which is an important seat actually, because obviously Wisconsin is a swing state, and the Supreme Court, the control of the Supreme Court there is up for grabs in that election, and it's very important. And I think that a lot of kind of nationally focused media outlets wouldn't necessarily be covering that. But, at 538, we would live blog election nights and kind of cover the results as they come in. And, we might be able to tell you, oh, maybe this candidate has a lead right now, but it's because votes haven't been counted in this, other part of the state that's better for their opponent. And so, yeah, things like that, I worry about a little bit. And, again, not to sound like a broken record, but I hope that other places take up the mantle.
Nathaniel Rakich, thank you very much indeed for being with us on Planet America.
Thank you very much.
Now, Nathaniel was depressed.
Yeah.
So am I. Yeah. I have to say, because look, he's right. Their presentation techniques have spread through the media. You're seeing a lot more graphs than we used to, a lot more data than we used to. But you know what? We're seeing the superficial trappings of 538. What made 538 was not graphs. What made 538 was the intellectual heft behind the graphs.
Yep.
It's the old stats, there's lies, damn lies, and statistics. And they went behind the statistics. They really crunched the numbers properly in a way that the normal media just does not do. They're not capable of doing it. Stats are hard. Polling is hard, and most journalists, to be honest, are terrible at it. And those 538 were excellent at it, and I think they're going to be really missed. Their analysis, the level of their analysis is not going to be there. Now they're gone.
Yeah, they haven't released any data publicly as to what's happened in the last year or so at 538 in terms of the number of page impressions. It is certainly the case that a number of media outlets, MSNBC, CNN and others, their ratings have declined significantly since the election. A lot of people, there's a bit of a tune-off factor. If they don't support Trump, they don't want to hear about what he's doing. I think it's also fair to say that Nate Silver, he became the golden boy after 2008 and 2012, correctly predicting the outcome of those elections. 2016, of course, came back down to earth, saying that there was a greater likelihood than not that Hillary Clinton was going to win. And since then, they've had a very, very good record, and Nathaniel's right, they've kind of educated us on those kind of how probabilities work and how margins of error work and all of those things. But I think, hence my first question to him, it's sort of, I do tend to think that people, they do shoot the messenger. They don't like it when the news is bad. When the polls last year were saying that Trump was gaining ground on Kamala Harris in the final weeks of the campaign, there was a lot of complaints from Democrats and the left saying that these polls are all terrible. All these junk Trump polls are being shoved out there to try and juice his numbers. Well, it turns out they were right. They were right. Trump was gaining ground and he won the election. So I think there's a bit of an element there as well, that people are increasingly just wanting to see their own opinions reinforced. Even if it's the data, they want the data to agree with them as well. They don't want to be contradicted at all.
I think you're right. But for those people who do follow polling averages, as you say, going into the election, there was a lot of concern about junk polls flooding the market. And what 538 did that was different to other pollsters was they allowed for the methodologies and for the track records of pollsters.
They weighted them. They didn't treat all polls as equal.
Exactly. And whereas Real Clear Politics just treats them all, just throws them into an average and that's it, right?
Yeah, including some real outliers like Rasmussen and others.
Totally. And so if people are wondering, where can we get a polling average now that's like 538? When 538 folded, there was none. It took like 3 days for Nate Silver to go, you know what? I remember how to do this. And so if you go to his Substack, which costs money, there's a free polling average there.
This is the silver bulletin.
This is a silver bulletin.
Right.
Yeah, like if you go there is a free polling average that works like his old 538 polling averages. So you can get a weighted polling average still, which is I'm going to be looking at, and I imagine a lot of you will as well. But other than that, 538's gone.
Yeah, well, maybe he's going to start it up all over again, just like 2008. But that is it for another weekend edition of Planet America. We'll see you back here at the same time next week, and any time you like on ABC iView, YouTube and Facebook.
And we'll be back with a brand new midweek episode on ABC TV on Wednesday night at 9:40 p.m. Also on iView from 9 p.m. See you there.
Bye-bye.